Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today another book review as per usual, because every week we have a book review, and this week we're going into Brandon Sanderson with Dragonsteel Prime. So I have to preface this by saying no, we are not diving into a Cosmere novel, or we kinda are, but we kinda are not, and I'll get to it soon, but just know that this is not official Cosmere. This book was actually one of the first that Brandon Sanderson wrote. He wrote it as his honors thesis when he was in university, and he planned it to be his big epic in Cosmere. However, the book never ended being published, and so he kinda started doing edits to it, and eventually he decided to put it aside and take some of those ideas and transplant them into his series that exist currently, like Mistborn or Stormlight Archive or many others. And so because of that, this book ended up becoming a curiosity, what he calls it, a Sanderson curiosity or a Cosmere curiosity. For the ones that don't know, this is an epic fantasy book, if you hadn't guessed, because Brandon Sanderson is famous for his epic fantasy. It was published initially in 2001. Again, this was 24 years ago, probably when Brandon Sanderson was at university, and so considered published as in his honors thesis. This edition that I have here is a leather-bound edition that he released it with the backer kit for Words of Radiance, which are these books here, the leather-bound edition again. On Goodreads, this book has only 1,000 ratings, and I know this is so weird to see a Sanderson book that only has 1,000 ratings, especially when you consider that it was published only in 2001, or already in 2001, so a lot of years ago, and it only has 1,000 ratings. But that's also because a lot of people didn't know about it, and the people that have access to it now with this edition are the ones that backed the backer kit. However, one thing that is even more surprising is the rating that this book has, because its score is only 3.8 out of 5, which I don't think any other Sanderson book has, or at least I do not remember any that does. But hey, it is what it is. We can only acknowledge this score and say what we think about it, which is what I'll do soon. But first, we have our housekeeping item. If you don't know this part, I'm gonna read the synopsis to you, narrate it. If you don't want to hear anything about it, then just skip to the next point, which would be the plot, where we start talking about plot. But if you want to stick around, understand what this book is about, just have a sense of it, and then we'll jump into the review. Stay put and let's go. A story that was once only accessible in the vaults of the BYU library is lined up to join your Sander shelf. This novel takes place on Yolen and follows a young man named Jarek, as well as prominently featuring a fool who calls himself Topaz, who you may recognize by one of his many other names. The second half includes Brandon's first attempt at the Bridge 4 story, with characters including Rock and Gaz, but a different bridge leader in Kaladin's role. Written immediately after Elantris in 2001, it's a non-canon peek at what might have been, and a favorite among Brandon's earliest readers. And that is it. This is more of a context synopsis rather than actually give you a sense of what the book is about, but you get a sense of it, and it actually mentions some of the things I will also mention in this book review. So let's get on with it. We start our review with plot, and I'm going to preface this by saying that I think there will be two types of readers here. If you've read the Stormlight Archive books, then you'll experience this one very differently from a person that has not. I think both people, these two types, can enjoy this book just as much, but they will definitely be very different experiences. For me, I have read the Stormlight Archive, except for the latest book, Wind and Truth, so my review will reflect that. If you are new to the Stormlight Archive, new to the Cosmere, take that into account when you decide if you want to read this book or not. Like the synopsis says, this book is kind of divided in two parts, the pre and post-war. I would say that the first part, the pre-war, is quite original, singular, in the sense that it doesn't seem to be very influenced by Stormlight Archive, or Stormlight Archive doesn't seem to be very influenced by this book. Whereas the second part, it's very, very similar, and it just feels like it's Stormlight Archive in a parallel universe. And what I have to say about these two parts is that I love both of them. Initially, I was super keen to read about this world that doesn't seem as complex as the usual Brandon Sanderson's worlds, but felt very fantastic nonetheless. And as we progress with the plot, there are some parts that we get familiar and we recognize from the books that we have read from Brandon Sanderson, but at the same time, there's still a lot of elements that are new and are fantastic and makes the reading a lot more engaging. There are quite a few plot twists across the story. Some of them won't be very surprising for the Stormlight Archive readers, but I think new readers will definitely enjoy it and they will definitely be mind-blown. Of course, if you read Stormlight Archive, you might be bored with the second part of this book because it's very similar to Stormlight Archive, and you might just think, oh, it's just a copy with a bit less quality. But for me, considering that this book was actually published first, it deserves its merits, and the similarity it has, it just shows that Brandon Sanderson was able to pick this book and then transform it into something even better. And because of that, I'm going to give Plot a score of 5 out of 5. I think it totally deserves the merit that it has, considering all the work that was put into it in terms of plot. Now let's talk about characters. We have a couple of POVs that we follow, with our main one being Jarek. Which, by the way, I have to say, Jarek does not sound like a hero's name whatsoever. When I was reading, and every time it was Jarek, I only imagined this scrawny kid that doesn't have much going on for him, which is weird, especially in the later parts of the book when he's already an adult with beard and very Kaladin-like. But yeah, Jarek, just not the best name. But anyways, Jarek makes a great hero, and together with the rest of the POVs we have, I think the whole ensemble is great. With Jarek, we see a huge evolution from the start of the book till the end, and it's okay that there's a lot of plots that are similar to Stormlight Archive, but I think since this was published first, I think this arc was just amazing for Jarek. The other characters are not as evolved, I would say, but I think they are still dripping with personality. And those are, for example, Topaz and Batshore. Again, if you've read Stormlight Archive, you will recognize that some of these characters are the pre-form of what we would eventually see as Kaladin or Shallan, or better even how Wit is based on Topaz. But for a person who's read Stormlight Archive, I think that's part of the fun of it, is reading this book and realizing all these little things that are now part of a book that we already know. Although I do have to mention that this category was for me the one that wasn't as perfected as the other ones, because the characters sometimes would do or think or say things that didn't feel exactly coherent. Or another way to explain it is they felt a bit basic, or they were doing or saying or thinking things just to move the plot forward, and not really because them as characters would actually do those things. And maybe some of the side characters weren't as fully fleshed out as what we would expect from a Sanderson work nowadays. But then again, this was one of his first works, so there has to be that consideration. And because of that, I'm going to give this category a 4 out of 5. Halfway, and we're diving into world building. And now this category is quite split, because on one side, we clearly see the seeds of what would become the Shattered Plains of the Stormlight Archive. Although, of course, still a bit basic compared to the Stormlight Archive scenarios. And the same thing can be applied to other parts of this world. They do seem a bit simple and cute and lacking that complexity that makes the world feel so real. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's still a world that it's highly coherent, and it still has the capacity to create different cultures, different peoples, and make everything feel fantastic, so it really feels you're diving into a fantasy world. And then of course we have to talk about the magic systems, because what is a Sanderson work without a great magic system? I think this one in this work was probably the magic system I've seen that is most closely connected to science. I love personally, because I love when magic and science become so close that they're almost indistinguishable. We learn throughout the book, bit by bit, how things work until you think that you know enough, and then suddenly Sanderson throws in a wrench and rules get changed a tiny bit, still within the context of the magic system, but it innovates things and makes things a lot crazier but fun, and at the same time still coherent. And what amazes me most is that this was created as an honors thesis. So it shows how much Sanderson has evolved since then, but also how much imagination he had at the time. So for me, this category is definitely a 5 out of 5. Let's move on to the writing style. And continuing with the theme of this review, you can definitely see an evolution from Brandon Sanderson's honors thesis to the books that he publishes now. You can tell by the way he writes, the way characters are, the way of the pacing, how the pacing progresses in the book. None of them are bad in this book, in Dragonsteel Prime, but they are definitely a bit more basic and simple. I still thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think I enjoyed it for the opposite reason that I enjoy the Sanderson books of nowadays. I mean, Brandon Sanderson's current works are amazing. They are rich, they are complex, they have several magic systems, several plot lines from all these different books connecting. They are full of plot twists, and the best way I can describe it is that if you're having a 7-course meal in a fast food restaurant. And this work, Dragonsteel Prime, was a lot more simpler, just basic flavors, not as much complexity in magic systems, worlds, plot twists, etc. So it feels like more a home-cooked meal that you really love. And I think at the moment I was reading this book, it was exactly what I needed. So the lack of complexity was thoroughly enjoyed, which might not be the same for you when you read it. And especially that last plot twist, which I won't reveal, but that last plot twist was able to put a smile on my face and think, yep, he did it. And of course, when I say that lacks complexity, it's not so basic that everything is predictable whatsoever, because we start our book with one plot line. However, as the book progresses, we diverge into 3 different plot lines, and that helps build some complexity with the reader. But of course, I don't think it's to the level that we expect Brandon Sanderson's works of today. So for this category, I'm also going to give a 5 out of 5. And our last category is enjoyment, and I bet you can guess already that I enjoyed this book a lot. It was one of those cases where I was really happy to read more and know more about what was going to happen. Like I said, I think it's highly dependent on what you expect from this book when you start reading it. If you are or not a Stormlight Archive reader, if you want the typical Sanderson experience or not. But if you're up for a lighter adventure with everything good, then I think you'll enjoy this book just as much as I did. And I hope you'll find yourself giving some excuses to read a few more pages. So you can guess that my score is 5 out of 5. And so we end this review. Just as a refresher, we have 5 for plot, 4 for characters, 5 for world building, writing style, and enjoyment, which gives us a score of 4.8 out of 5. So very close to the 5, but not a 5 totally. But then again, this score is very different from the Goodreads score by 1 whole point, and that is a big difference. Then again, I think it's all dependent on what you expect when you go read this book. Think of it as what it is, a curiosity. It's like you have an insight into a young Sanderson's mind to see the seeds of some of his ideas that eventually would become the successes that they are today. I totally recommend it for the Sanderson fans that want to read one more book of his, taking into account what this is. For the new fans that want to dive into Sanderson's works and don't know where to start, probably wouldn't recommend this one, but I definitely would encourage you to read it once you've read a few others. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? Have you read this book and thought, oh, this is so boring, this is like a copy-paste of Stormlight Archive? Or do you think, oh, this is like a parallel universe? Comment down below, and if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, and you'll be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon!